Ladies and gentlemen, there is a decline of American leadership around the globe. There's a perception that America is on the retreat from the rest of the world, America that's tired of a decade of war, which I fully understand, an America that decides the fight is just not worth it anymore. And the decline of American leadership around the world is not something that we can't do because it's not good, but it's dangerous, not just to us, but to the rest of the globe.
It doesn't take a lot of searching or time spent listening to hear the critics and pundits in America talk about how this nation is perceived around the globe. Words such as ineffective, cowardly, spineless, and toothless are some of the norm these days. As we're told, we have zero respect around the world thanks in large part to the current administration. But what is the reality? And is it really as bad as some might make us think it is? Let us sally forth then into the international opinion pool. Joining us from Washington, D.C., welcome to MidPoint, Republican strategist Phillip Stutts, and the senior Washington correspondent for Talk Radio News Service, Justin Duckham. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here.
All right, I tell you what, Phillip, I'm going to go ahead and start out with you. America is in retreat, is what we just heard said. Agree or disagree?
Do I disagree?
Agree or disagree? Is that how we're perceived overseas?
I agree. I think whether you look at the border, which is definitely an international crisis, what's going on in Russia, Ukraine and Malaysia airline incident, if you look at what's going on in Iraq, if you look at what happened in Syria, and frankly, just today, the Turkish prime minister came out and said that the President Obama won't even return his phone calls anymore. My problem with and why I think this has diminished this is because now it is fed into the American press, not just conservative press, mainstream press. Chris Cillizza of the Washington Post has an article out that says, are American presidents doomed to fail? So whether it's our enemies, our friends, or those agnostic overseas, that's what they're reading, that's what they're seeing, and they're seeing those actions from the president, and it has diminished us considerably.
Justin, your turn on this, because there's a lot of people out there who would seem to agree with those sentiments. Do you?
Well, you know, of course, the foreign policy is not perfect, but Pew Research did have a poll coming out this month that showed in about 27 of 43 countries surveyed, there was a net positive rating for Obama. And I think it's sort of ridiculous to say that this tinderbox is sort of his fault. We know that madmen exist. We know that Putin has been pulling the strings for quite some time. And the idea that if we had a more ostensibly fearsome leader in charge, would change things is sort of ridiculous on the face of it. We know back in 2008, Putin was more than willing to invade Georgia with a Republican president who was viewed as sort of a hawk by the world. And I just don't think that we'd be seeing much difference if we had sort of a different setup on the American front.
Well, you do have to admit, though, that the president is the one who is in charge right now. So when it comes down to foreign policy and the setting of it, it really does sit at his desk. Come on, the buck stops here sooner or later, doesn't it?
No, it certainly does. And in some regards, he's essentially giving the world community and the people what they want, especially on the home front. We know that a lot of people were sort of sick of the interventionist strategies that we pursued under the Bush administration. That was why a lot of people initially voted for Obama in the first place. That and the view that he could help restore some global prestige. We know it's not at the sort of poor levels that we saw under Bush, even though there was, of course, quite a bit of room for improvement. So I think in that sense, we are not necessarily seeing a strictly successful foreign policy, but it could certainly be a lot worse. So that's a sort of a faint praise, but that's where it stands.
Phillip, could it really be any worse?
I don't see how there's faint praise. I mean, Obama whispered to Putin during the 2012 elections, let me get through this election cycle and then we can talk. That's diminished leadership. If you look at the way that President Obama talked during the campaign, that Mitt Romney was talking about, was living back in the 1980s, that's a message that Vladimir Putin sees and takes advantage of, and that's exactly what he's done.
Isn't it sending the wrong message here to the rest of the world with this non-interventionist policy that we have, where you have people like Putin, specifically, because that's what's happening right now, who know that they can take advantage of the situation. And when they take advantage of the situation, then it starts to spread to others as well. Justin, I'm going to go ahead and throw that to you first.
Well, just going back, we know that Putin would take advantage of any situation he was given, regardless of who was in charge. Right now, we have a pretty good foreign policy team established. We've moved away from the Hillary Clinton era and now have somebody who has some real foreign policy bona fides with John Kerry. He's sort of being stretched a little thin, which is unfortunate to say the least. But in terms of what we can really expect, it's not his fault that this tinderbox sort of emerged. We know that tensions have existed for quite some time, be it with Russia and the Ukraine or the Israelis in Gaza. And so to say that this is purely something that could have been prevented by Obama is just sort of being a little intellectually
Wait a minute, but we can say that it's not his fault. I agree with you there. That's what some people will say. But isn't it the job of the sitting president of the United States in order to take control, be the leader? I think that's the biggest thing that people are talking about here, Justin. They don't see leadership from this president. And every time we talk to anybody overseas, whether it be journalist, individual, representative, they continue to bring up the word leadership. They don't respect the guy, Justin.
Well, how would we really want this leadership to take place? And that's really kind of the question at the end of the day. Americans have spoken out. They say they don't want these sort of scary interventionist policies that we've had for quite some time. And this is pretty much what the result of that is. And this is what American leadership is, for better or worse, going to look like for quite some time until those attitudes shift.
All right. Now, Phillip, I'm going to throw it to you when it comes down to leadership here, because what do we want to see? Do we want to see the guy wearing a pair of 6 guns walking out with a 10-gallon hat on to go ahead and get ready to take everybody to task here? I mean, what is it that the president is missing then?
Sure. I'd say this. Look, if you look at President Obama's response to the Malaysian shooting down of the airline, and then you compare that with Reagan in the 80s, with the Korean airline being shot down. It's not. Reagan was very forceful in his speech. He addressed the country, sat down in the Oval Office. He sent a message. And frankly, that's just a micro view of it. The macro view of it is that Reagan always held his ground with people overseas. And Obama seems to retreat or offered veiled threats. And over time, that weighs on the international community. They see it. They know there's nothing behind it. And they take advantage of the situation. Haven't
we gotten to a point, gentlemen, where it doesn't make a difference who the president of the United States is right now, but looking at the different factions you have, the terrorists, the dictators, the leaders, if you will, that you can't come out and say something in the first press conference, well, we'll deal with it. The second press conference, well, we'll try to deal with it. But you've got to come out in that first one right now, and you need to let people know where you stand right away, and you've got to be forceful about it. Phillip, I'll let you go first.
And we can cut off a lot more on the financial institutions that deal with President Putin and Russia. The European community is not doing that at all. We can do more. The president has that ability to do it. He's not doing it.
All right. Justin, to you.
And I would agree with that. The sort of messaging for this has been pretty far off. It has not necessarily projected strength or comfort to those at home who really care about it. So I will concede that there has been some serious shortcomings when it comes to how we're getting our message across.
All right, now wait a minute. You just said the messaging is off now, so you know how this works here. I'm going to have to jump on that because it seems all of a sudden you have now come over to what you might consider the dark side here, that there is a lack of leadership here. You are willing to admit at least that there is some lack of leadership here in this administration.
No, I mean, look, you're never going to get a necessarily perfect foreign policy. You're never going to have the sort of perfect leader that people have set up. And if you're going to be comparing a sitting president to somebody like Reagan, who is now viewed with rose-colored glasses, you're not necessarily ever going to stand up. So I will say he could be a stronger leader on this. But in terms of where we stand right now, this is a far cry from the sort of dangerous leadership we've seen in the past from presidents who've been willing to sort of flex their muscles in ways that really made the situation quite a bit worse in quite a few instances.
I got about 90 seconds left, and Phillip, I'm going to come to you first. Is it not fair to say that if we don't take strong action, if whomever the president is doesn't get right out there and get in front of things, that we make ourselves a greater target for those who are simply looking at us as weak and are looking to kill Americans?
Sure. Listen, this goes back to when Russia first came into Ukraine, and President Obama said, we will not be involved in that international incident. It's not that I wish or any American wishes that we would be involved. It's that you never take your options off the table. And that's leadership. And sure, the president does have his hands tied to a certain extent, but true leadership, all options on the table, certainly sends a message to the international community instead of passive nature of this president. It's been a real detriment to this country.
Justin, 30 seconds, you get the last word.
Well, you also have to build support at home, and by promising that you're not going to send combat troops immediately, you're also shoring up the idea that Americans will support the decision that you ultimately choose to make. So I don't think it's necessarily that big of a criminal offense to take that off the table.
All right, now we're going to have the two of you back again at another time to do this because, Justin, I think perhaps on the other side, Phillip may think he scored one there. So we'll have to come back again at another time. We'll give you a chance to come back and do it again. Phillip Stutts, Justin Duckham, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here and sharing your opinions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is quite frank to say that you hear what goes on there. There is a thinking process that if America does not put the hammer down right from the very first second, that we see ourselves and the world sees us as being weak. All right, on deck, a word to the wise for those seeking to spend some holiday time in two certain parts of the world. File this one under the common sense portion of the program, because certainly if you've been listening and know what's going on in the world, you'll get the drift. The main drift continues right here on MidPoint, where we question everything.